John. I'm with a company called Equity Alliance out of Bedford, New Hampshire. I am not the developer in question. I am what they call a development consultant. I help clients work through issues about development and discussions with towns and do entitlements. And I'm also considered one of the experts in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts on Chapter 40B. So, you know, I appreciate the fact that you all came out tonight. I'm glad to see you're all here and active and have an interest in the project. And what we'd like to try to do tonight through this informational hearing is to share the kinds of discussions that have been taking place to date, what we've learned, what we're doing, and to squelch all fears, not because I may sit here and convince you that you're in favor of the project, and maybe I will never do that. But what I'd like to at least take the opportunity to be able to make sure, to ensure that you understand the facts that are relating to the project and what has been discussed today. So first off, the applicant in question, though nothing's actually been applied for yet, is an entity called Apartments at Powdermill, LLC. And it's a gentleman named Vincent Coutone, who has spent a considerable time acquiring all the properties in question. And first, let me orient everybody to make sure they know where we are. So, Powdermill, the Acton-Maynard line runs through the property, and as you're probably aware, on the Acton side, it's filled currently with a series of industrial properties right up to the river's edge and a number of buildings. And along the road frontage, there's about 3 residential homes. And Mr. Coutone has acquired all the property in question, which encompasses about 12.65 acres, of which 2.18 acres are actually in the town of Maynard. So the first thing I want to discuss is that I know there's been some concern expressed, and I've been told about it, is that there's been meetings taking place. What's been going on? There's been no public hearings. What have you all been doing? And so at my request, I had contacted Kevin Sweet in the town, and often as a developer, you come in, there's a myriad of issues in the town. Sometimes you can overcome those issues, other times you never reach agreement. And rather than to start and immediately right off the bat with a clean slate, I wanted to come in and explore and understand the issues in Maynard, the issues pertaining to the site, and just discuss in concept about the project and what are the kind of challenges and things relating to it. And so what I asked was whether or not a work group could be formed where we could just have discussions and discuss things, just what is the status of sewer? What are the road conditions out there? Just to have a discussion. But let me first assure you, there has been no agreement reached. I've made neither an application to apply for something on behalf of my client. The town has not entered into agreement to promise to do anything whatsoever, not a thing. All we've had is discussions about facts, and those facts are things I'd like to share with you tonight. So the first fact is you should know who attended the meetings. So the meetings were really comprised of 4 individuals and myself. Kevin Sweet, the town manager, and Bill Nevser, the town planner. Chris De Silva, the chair of the selectmen, and Melissa Levin-Parrell, one of the other selectmen. They were done only so that we can just explore and have a conversation, and honestly, sometimes it's very nice to do, so I could share things like my son got engaged Saturday night. We could have conversations, which you can't do when you get out quite into the same public forum. So, but again, I need to assure you that nothing really has happened yet, nothing whatsoever. So what is proposed? What is the process? What are the issues? And what are the things we've discovered today? So the first thing is that what we are proposing to do, which is called a Chapter 40B, which is under the affordable housing laws in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, that says, in fact, that 10% of your housing stock has to be deemed affordable in perpetuity, so it has to be deeded to be affordable, under the guidelines, and those units need to be registered with the Department of Health and Community Development in Boston. And why I say deeded and in perpetuity is because often what you hear people say is, well, we have inexpensive rented apartments, but the problem is those are not necessarily qualifying as they relate to what the law states. And so if a town does not have that, in which a lot of towns and cities in the Commonwealth do not, there's a process that happens. And what a developer is able to do is one of really two paths. One is they could apply to the Zoning Board of Adjustment, and they can sit there and say, I want to come in and do this project, and they can ask for a series of waivers. Those waivers could be things like it's not even the correct zone. It could be about height, it could be about setbacks, it could be about density, it could be about any and all things. And they go in that and they present the case, and it's heard for a very lengthy period of time, and a rendering one way or the other takes place. If it's denied and a proponent, an applicant, has a right to appeal, and there's a process that goes on through the Housing Appeals Committee down in Boston. The other path, when you talk about Chapter 40B, and I'll get into defining what affordability means in this context, is that you could do what's called a local initiative program, or what's referred to as a LIP. And what a LIP says is, a town sits there and says, I know I don't have housing stock of 10% possibly, or I really like this particular project for what its characteristics are, its location, other issues. And you could first apply to the Board of Selectmen, and the Selectmen basically either endorse, support, or decide that they can. It's not a negotiation yet that says that it's approved. It still must go back to the Zoning Board of Adjustment, and it still must go through process. There are a number of places in this process where the public gets to interact. Okay, and while we're having an informational hearing tonight, and I presume you're not all here to jump up and down and say, we can't wait, and we're glad you came to town, so I know that you all have concerns, but honestly, and while I'm happy to hear them, I certainly am here for that purpose, is that there are several places where you get to come and to voice to your boards, to your politicians, about how you feel. One of them will be if and when we actually make a formal application under the LIP program. That would be then posted to the public. There would be a series of hearings at the Board of Selectmen, of which the Board of Selectmen would not be deciding necessarily the merits of whether or not we designed correctly for drainage, whether we had sufficient parking. It's whether or not they believe that there are interests to the town that are served by the project, and they therefore support it. And sometimes at that point, sometimes, not all time, there are things that are agreed to, that a developer will agree to. An improvement, a road widening, donation of a park, or whatever the particular case be, and those are discussed. Even if a Board of Selectmen were to vote in favor and say that, yes, the idea is of interest, it then goes to an application to the Department of Housing and Community Development, and they do what's called a site eligibility analysis, or they will ultimately issue a letter to that effect. And they go through their gyrations, and they look at the site, and they make a ruling themselves, and then it comes back, and then the developer or proponent again must apply to the ZBA and go through a series of hearings. You say, why does one do that and not go straight to the ZBA? Because sometimes it allows for a different dialogue about issues that are important to the town that a developer can do and have a conversation that at the ZBA, they no longer can ask for those things in the same way. They've sort of given up their rights. They're now doing it in a very specific way in which that process goes. We're not here to be unfriendly.
What is the ZPA?
Zoning Board of Adjustment.
Thank you.
And we're not here to be unfriendly. Is that, you know, I own property. I understand that there's concerns about property, where it should go, how it should be developed, and whether or not the pluses and minuses, when on point, are favorable to a community or not to a community. And I know that, you know, everybody starts off with the assumption, you know, not in my backyard, I don't really particularly want it. There's a reason why we looked at this particular site, why it's of interest. And partly it's because it is a burned out, dilapidated, commercial, industrial use that abuts directly on a river, right on the river, right? The building goes right up to the edge of it. And that it's really never going to be repurposed for that ever again, in our humble opinion. Others may feel differently about it. And so we look at it and say that this may be suitable for some sort of multifamily. We also look at it, and while I'm not mitigating anybody who's anywhere close to it, Deer Run or anybody around it, we looked at it at the number of direct abutters and how that configured, and thought that therefore it allowed for this type of development to be done in a place that had a least amount of impact, in our view. Others will feel differently, and that's perfectly fine. And so that's what sort of went to the issue. Now, what makes this one bizarre is the fact that the town line runs in the middle of the project. And I've been doing 40B for a long time, and so I was involved in the one that was now Avalon developed up in Acton on the Acton-Westford side. And that was an odd one because the town line ran in the middle. In order for Westford to service the property, they had to drive the ambulance from Westford to Littleton into Acton and back into Westford. And it went through a year and a half of whatever, and then finally got approved by both municipalities. But in that particular case, the buildings there were separate buildings in each town. Each one got a certain unit count, each one got some affordability, each got something for that. What makes this one different is the town line runs through the middle of two of the buildings. And so it raises a whole lot of other questions, and in my career at this point, I would sort of said to my wife, and I don't mean to get on the sideline, earlier this year is, I really want to get out of the entitlement business, honey. I work late hours, I come home, I'm aggravated, I can't sleep, and it stinks. And here I am now doing one that I have to do in two towns, and one that it goes to the question. So as an example, if it runs through the middle of a unit, and there's one bedroom in one town and one bedroom in the other town, where does the kid go to school? There is an answer to that, by the way. How does it get inspected? How does all the services get dealt with in the process? The discussions on why we started with the Board of Selectmen, the work group, and we've had a conversation with Acton, though there's nothing again from formally submitted there as well, was because this obviously created some challenges. It's been done once before in the Commonwealth, but it does create issues. And if you're wondering what the definition of how it defines where somebody goes to school, it's where the majority of the master bedroom lie. So that if 80% of a master bedroom is in one town, that would define where this kid would go to school, regardless of whether or not the second bedroom was located in the other town. I know it's bizarre, but actually somebody had a ruling to that effect. So what does affordable mean when we talk about 40B as well, too? Well, affordable here is several different ways in which Massachusetts define affordability for a project of this nature. We either can deem 25% of our units to people earning no more than 80% of the median household income. The idea and the target behind that is where police and firemen and school teachers, where they can afford to live. And so it's intended for that. And in the way the law works is that if the units ever come online, there is first what's called local preference, where in fact, you first have to offer it up to the local community after advertising and go through a lottery to first make sure that it's available to those people before you would offer it to anybody outside the community. And in that particular case, I'd say 25% of the units to people earning no more than 80% of the median household income. Or one could do 20% of the units to 50% of the median household income. And while at the moment we have taken the road of saying that we want to do 25% of the units to 80% is what our target is. And honestly, we don't have to decide that ultimately for a long time to come, but that's when we talk about things right now, what we're talking about in terms of which ones are the market rate units and which one are affordable.
Excuse me, median income of the town or of the state?
That's an interesting question. It's not the median income of the state. It's actually DHC will go to the issue of the median household income for the area in which this town involves, and that is a higher one. But actually, we run our numbers based on the 80% of median household income of the area. So that's the number we're working on in our minds of how to rent. And it does is it controls the rent, and there's a whole process. And if somebody then earns more the next year, there's a way in which they can earn more and they don't disqualify themselves. There's a whole process to it. And I could spend hours going through that, but that's the bureaucracy of the system. Why apartments at all? Well, apartments serve a very important part in today's economy. It is a form of housing by choice for a lot of people who may or may not wish to own, but don't necessarily want to necessarily live in older product that doesn't have the 9-foot ceilings, the amenities. It could be for the senior sector selling houses who want to stay in a community. But there is still a demand in the market today for apartments. Not everywhere, because you've seen, probably heard, lots of them being built in the area. But there still is a demand, and the client here is talking about a project that in total exceeds $50 million. And so, trust me, when you talk about money of that nature, you don't do throwing it a coin up or a dart at a board and hope you win. So obviously, research is being done, and constantly the market changes and it's being looked at, okay? So there is a idea that this is a good location due to its proximity. There is an idea that there's a need for the housing still in the market to give choices. And this is a project that is very amenity rich as proposed, okay? In addition to 9-foot ceilings and granite and a bathroom for each bedroom, you know, all central controls, we'll have a clubhouse with a fitness center, a pool, a dog park, a outdoor barbecue, you know, a grill. It's meant to if somebody wanted a choice for this type of housing, to offer something that is more desirable in its design. It also is designed as a multi-story building, but the ground floor is parking. Yeah, I know it doesn't look like it's parking, but that's really parking and driving in at ground level. It doesn't go down, it's actually at ground level. And so every unit is proposed, or most every unit, to have an enclosed parking space in addition. So it's going to be an elevated building, it's going to have enclosed parking, it's going to be amenity rich, and it's going to be modern with all the fire protection and sprinklers and all the things that one would expect.
I have a question. You're saying it will be. Are these things that are guaranteed?
This is what we're proposing. This is the application. This is what it would be. The answer is, I guarantee you. The answer is yes. I'm making the representation. And that's our view of the market. If we came in and just did something that didn't have these things, and it's why I'm doing a project down in Tewksbury with another client, and he's made it into almost a country club, a resort setting, and I gotta tell you that people are just flocking because it really offers a not renter by necessity, but renter by choice sort of product, okay, to try to provide that. And again, that's not right for many of you. This is a home, you know, a home with very, you know, lots of single-family homes in this community, and it's not intended to take away from it. But that being said, that again, this project has there's been a lot of discussion out in the market, and while I'm not privy to the Facebook page, I'm aware there's one floating around, lots of facts being talked about, and so I'm here tonight to just tell you what the discussions have been and what we focused on, and to set the record straight. Now that you may come, some of you may say, you know, that's not so bad, maybe I'm open to the others. Others may say, I simply don't want it, and I respect it. This is not about right or wrong, but it's at least tonight trying to help you understand sort of the discussions we've been having up to date. So a couple things you should know. The project in entirety is proposed as a 254-unit project, of which all but 74 units are in the town of Acton. Now, I can't tell you for sure what Acton is or will not do, but Acton is very much nowhere close to their 40B requirement. And we have had one informational hearing with them, and you know they want somebody to come along in a project they can get behind. Whether they will or they won't, we've made no application to them. If we call them up and they say and ask the Board of Selectmen, have you heard from them? The answer is no, they have not. And you know, so, but they have an interest in trying to get more affordable units and qualifying more towards that 10%. See, there's a choice what happens in town. Under 40B, a lot of developers came into towns and they would do what's called an unfriendly 40B, go straight to the ZBA and sort of force that to take place, and they often win, and they would build it. And so the other way allows for a more interactive sort of dialogue. And Acton is interested in trying to get affordable units. Out of the 74 units, there are 32 one-bedrooms that are proposed, 37 two-bedrooms, and 5 three-bedrooms. Now, that's based on this formula of what counts as to where the master bedroom lies and making that determination count. So, the square footage wise, it's an odd thing. I'm gonna get into some of the other issues of what that brought into question, issues that pertaining to it. They are different height buildings. So the building along the street is proposed as 3-story over parking in a stepped-up configuration. The architect that's being used here is a company out of New Jersey I've dealt with before in a couple projects, Gate 17. All they build around the country is apartments. They don't do anything else. They are a guru when it comes to understanding the end resident and what they want to see in their apartments, okay? And so we went to there's a lot of times you go to local architectural firms and they'll go, sure, well, we go out to design it, and they start with a blank piece of paper. These people don't. They do 8,000 units a year, and the guy I deal with has done hundreds of thousands of units, and they understand the industry and what really the people want, because again, back to that comment I said, a $50+ million investment, and the amount of all the cash that has to go in for that to occur and all the risk, trust me, nobody wants to even consider and talk about that and fail. Okay, that's not even in the cards. That's too much money at stake. So what the end product looks like, how it's configured, its amenities, and how it's designed is very much important to its success, and also how it performs in comparison to the competition in the market. As you move around the project, the buildings do get taller. This goes to a 4-story, and these are 5-story. These are in Acton, and again, these two other buildings split between the two towns. And again, you all have comments afterwards, I have no doubt. We're proposing 1.75 spaces of parking per unit. Where did that number come from? Well, there's been national studies done about really the idea of trying to find a balance between asphalt and what is really needed. And so there's much, and you're going to see later that we had traffic engineers to analyze that further to confirm up in fact that they were comfortable with it as well. So it's intended to try to find a balance to allow for proper parking for the space without trying to just create asphalt for the sake of having asphalt. Nobody likes it in grocery store parking lots except as a convenience to the store. And so this is intended to try to control that. And again, a lot of the parking is underground. So what are the issues here? Well, one of them obviously is utilities. And I know there's much scuttlebutt about, oh, Maynard, you're providing and gave away the sewer already. Well, nothing again took place like that whatsoever. So there are two parts about this. There's water and there's sewer. So I will tell you up front that Maynard does not have water. Acton has water. So we have had a conversation with the Acton Independent, they're not part of the town, they have an independent water district, and they are interested in providing water to the site for both sides. They're happy to do that, and we worked out sort of the logic behind that. On the other side of the coin is, well, why don't you then go to sewer to Acton? Well, because Acton, while you guys have a water issue, Acton has a sewer issue. And so they don't really have the same capacity, and whether or not you all ever wanted to, whether or not the board ever, the selectmen votes to approve it, whether or not the sewer commission can validate and say it's working, at the moment, Maynard has the capacity for the sewer. Whether or not they do it is a whole separate question. Does it make sense to do it? What are the issues pertaining to it? So what happened is we started off with an assumption at the request, and this is what happens in the work group. This is what we were able to do behind the scenes. The town said, well, you should hire Wayne Drain, those are our people, we go to camera the entire line down Powdermill until you got to the lift station. So they put a camera in there, and they went and did this whole big lengthy report, and they took lots of pictures, and anybody who really wants to be entertained, now we can share you pictures, but what it showed was that there were problems with the line as it currently exists. There are roots that have penetrated all over the pipe. There are segments that have cracks in them. There is a failure at the beginning point of Powdermill, and it's a failure of the piping. And I'm using the word failure, and somebody will tell you grading-wise what that means, but there is an issue in the last segment from when it gets off the paved area of Powdermill until it gets into the lift station, okay? And so those have been identified problems, okay? And whether or not we ever develop, this is a problem that all residents who use that power, who rely upon that, I'm just going to tell you now, The problem's out there, there is a problem. I'm sure there's other places in the town, there's similar problems. But it's amazing the roots, how, given enough time, trees penetrate. And what happens when they do, they create resistance in the pipe. They therefore impede flow. And ultimately what happens is pipes no longer have the capacity they were once designed for. So the next logical question was, well, what would one have to do to make sure that we could in fact add flow to it, and whether or not we can improve it? And so then we went out to the town's vendor, Stantec, and asked them to run an estimate, to look at their all the reports, to whatever else, and say, well, how much would it cost to fix the sewer line? And they've come up with a budget that says it's about $400,000, plus or minus. And that's a combination of liners in certain places, and other places the actual pipes have to be taken out and removed. Whether or not we ever do anything, it's a liability one day or another the town will have to address for the people who rely upon that portion of the system. But all we've done up to this point is gone through and analyzed what are the issues associated with the sewer line, and can we increase the flows, and what would it take to get to the sewer lift station? We are told by Stantec and the experts who support you all, not ours, that in fact at that point the lift station is adequate supply, and so is the actual plant itself. Okay? Now you're going to get, later in the presentation I'm going to tell you how much so we would have to cost us to attach to it. That's a separate matter of the financial dollars that have to change hands, beyond the fact that the line itself would have to be repaired for that anything to happen, even if we were to come along. Second thing we looked at was impacts to schools. Okay, I know that's a great concern for anybody who has kids in the school. It's a great concern on the cost of it. I know you've spent money as a community to invest in your schools, and there's always this idea that apartments are going to therefore drive up the amount of school children and put an undue burden on the community. And so there is actually a study that everybody in the Commonwealth uses, and many other states, called the Rutgers University Center for Urban Policy Research on Residential Demographic Multiplier Estimates of the Occupants of New Housing for Massachusetts. Nice short name. And so this study then goes in and says, based on the number of bedrooms, and they do differentiate between market and affordable, because remember, 25% of our units are deemed affordable, even in the ones in Maynard, 25% would be affordable. And so how many school children does that equate to? And the answer is it's slightly less than 11. So it's not, everybody else is in Acton, and Acton has its own issues, and Acton, you know, that's a separate discussion for the town of Acton as to its capacity, because the majority of units are in Acton. But when we talk about it and keeping things perspective, and it's a really hard thing, and, you know, is to just understand, we didn't make this thing up. These are studies. This is what people, you know, this is the analysis of what it says, is that it in fact will generate 11. Now it does not go on to then talk about, well, how many would be in kindergarten, third grade, and fifth grade, but if you take 11 kids and spread it out through K through 12, you know, yes, it could be weighted one, it could be all young children. The answer is we don't know. You don't know who's ever going to move in to know that. But it's not bringing busloads of children into the community. One of the benefits of anything that would ever be developed, it shouldn't be developed, is the fact that it does increase the taxable base in this community. So as part of the work group, one of the things that were tasked to me, and I approached the town of Acton's Angela Marama, the town assessor, to ask the question based on our plans. I gave her what we had, which, you know, it's limited. We haven't designed out a building, but to estimate approximately how much more taxable building would be added to added to the town, and therefore what would be the income that could be generated from the taxes on the building. And she came back and said that you would create about $9.2 million of new basis in the town, and it would generate approximately $217,400 based on today's tax rate. Now, that's not a determination today, that's the exact number, no, because it first has to be built. There's a whole process towns go through at that point to go in and to analyze what the value is. And so, but it's an estimate, so that when you look to try to understand on balance whether or not a project's good for a community and how it impacts the community. You can't just talk about all of just the negatives that, that it's going to create problems. You have to also look at some of the positives, and there are some. So 217,400. Next thing, which I know is a big concern to everybody, is traffic. Okay, and there has been a lengthy and costly process. Is that what we did on our side to start the ball rolling was we had a company called GPI do a traffic study. Traffic study goes and they put counts on the road in May of last year. And the reason why May was an important date is it has to be done during the school year, because that traffic changes patterns in the summer than they do during the school year. So the higher demands on the roads are always in the school year, especially with the school buses. So you always want to do your counts in May. So they produced a draft report. The draft report then was reviewed by a town consultant, VHB, acting independently, who then read it and came back. And the first thing was, we even got them in a room one day to talk about philosophically their approach to things, what this was. There were lots of Q&A going back and forth because, engineers, anytime you put them in a room, they're always got something to say, otherwise they don't justify why they're going to charge you. So they went back and forth a number of times and analyzed turning movements, everything. We analyzed the turning movement into the Stratus property. We analyzed the turning movement in and out of Wendy's to the auto store, to Deer Run. All those turning movements were looked at, and they're analyzed several different ways. They're analyzed currently, as it currently exists today, looking to the future under a no-build scenario, meaning we never come along and what those intersections look like if nothing else was developed. And then they also are done assuming that we were to produce this much traffic. And in doing that, not only do they then analyze the impacts to these intersections, they're obviously in that looking at the turning movements and what is the probability that people are going left versus right. And they go through this whole methodology to try to ascertain the patterns of what they expect might happen. And as you might expect, that in the morning rush hour, the traffic would predominantly turn left. And the Saturday traffic, where you hopefully these new residents would come if this was built, and to shop at your stores, you'd want them to turn right. So there are impacts to it one way or the other. In that discussion, there was well, wait a minute, what about Stratos? Well, today there's nothing that's coming out of all that empty industrial. What happens if? And so a further analysis was done in, I guess it was August, September, where the engineers went back and forth again with a series of assumptions and looked at that as if it was fully occupied again as an R&D development. You had to come up with some assumption. It could be anything. And we looked at its current zoning, and we took into account all that square footage and said if you brought people back in there, and then it would analyze what would happen and where they would come from in the morning to get to work, where they would go, how that would conflict with traffic, if the project was built or if it wasn't built. All those reports, and the final report is yet to be issued, will be made available, but they were independently reviewed by the town peer reviewer consultant at the developer's expense. There was no dollars spent by the community whatsoever. Everything that was done, Standex, the Wayne's drains, camera work, this was all paid for by the developer. They upfronted the cash right off the bat. But your consultant went in to look at this to challenge and say, well, what does this all mean? The bottom line to it is that intersection turning movements are graded A, B, C, D, E, F. Okay? And that every turning movement in the no Stratos development really had no degradation of their turning movement performance, except for Wendy's turning left out of the property on Saturday midday, in which case that dropped one notch down from, I think, a B to a C or something like that. And by the way, in the grading system, a D is still considered by the traffic gurus to be accepted, and your DPW, and D does not mean that it's a bad thing. It just means that the waiting time could increase by, and they measure it sometimes in seconds, okay? And so that there is discussion about these gurus going back and forth, whether or not a project would warrant some adjustment to, right now there's a mid-turning lane that there's a left-hand turn laning there, and whether or not and how that would be configured and striped. But other than working out those details, the project unto itself does not, as some would imagine, completely bring disaster and wreak havoc on your road network in that respect. It does add cars. I'm not going to tell you it doesn't, but based on the capacity analysis today, that it doesn't. Now, for those who, of course, who are out there in rush hour, for those who wait, for those who watch all this stuff, I'm sure the answer is, oh my God, I don't want to wait one more second. So I get that fact that again, but all we can do is do the analytical part about it and hire the experts who are far wiser than I am to sort of parse through that and to try to ascertain how that's going to perform. And again, the work group was nothing more to allow that discussion to take place to see whether or not that traffic what would happen if in fact the project was developed. And that was considering all units. And it assumed two things. It assumed ultimately at the recommendation of the engineer by the town that the entrance down in Acton be pushed down a little bit further so it aligned with the Wendy's driveway, back to Wendy's again. And those who are trying to get oriented on Powdermill, this driveway is across from the Stratos entrance. Okay, to just give you a bearing on how that relates. And I'm sorry I don't have a plan that shows all the entrances and curb cuts along the way. So we did go through a long, extensive process, and even to this day, the final report is close to be hot off the presses, and certainly would be made available to anybody who wanted to read what is a very yawner of a text on how these engineers go through this analysis to determine traffic. Again, some of you may conclude that I just don't want any more cars in my town. I get that effect. That's a different discussion. All we can do is do it in this fashion. Okay? The next one was public safety. Okay, a very important thing, because here you have units that one would argue, I think we figured it out one day, it's an ambulance takes 30 or 45 seconds longer to get from Acton, therefore would Maynard have to respond to units in Acton, what would happen, and how you all work together between communities. And you have an agreement with the towns around you, and you help each other out in fires, and you respond to ambulances, and all that good stuff, as one would expect you to do. Because hopefully, in all this craziness in this world, we do act as good neighbors sometimes. So that was discussed, and we brought in Chief Stowers and Chief Du Bois, and we had a discussion about that, about what would happen, because there's no question about it that this could be the Acton side could be closer for a police incident for the Maynard police to show up, and vice versa, and there are instances. Neither one were overly bothered by it. They already today, there's the project over in the Muse over in Concord that often Maynard responds to incidents today, and they weren't. There was a couple things that were pointed out that I'll share with you. One was Chief Stowers did express a little bit of concern over the age of your ambulance, and the fact that he thought that there was the ambulance possibly could use a little tender loving care of money. To deal with that, and so he was honest about it, and because he said that this project would increase a little bit of burden on the ambulance service, and they, in order to rise to the occasion, might experience some additional costs. And the chief also had some concerns, not over the tallness of the buildings, because they're all going to be fully sprinklered and smart buildings and everything else, but he did have a little concern to make sure that we had proper access around the buildings. And so, it was more of a design question at hand about how one would go about it to ensure that they could properly service it in the event of. And it's not that Acton's fire or ambulance service is far away, but there is probably a minute or two difference if both were having a race to get to the finish line, and it depends on where they were when they started that exercise. And so, but they do, and we did discuss the fact that of how this project was configured and how that would affect them. We ultimately will have the same discussion with Acton on everything I'm talking to you about now, about the things we've just had a discussion with Maynard about. We will do the same thing in Acton over time. And once formal application is made, both of these get vetted out in the public the same way too, through first the Board of Selectmen and then ultimately to the ZBA. Next thing is that some economic things, because I told you there's some economics to this. and there's not a lot more to my presentation. One is there are municipal fees that would be realized by the town initially, and from a building permit standpoint and fees and what have you, plumbing permits and all that stuff, about $183,000 of fees. Little tidbit. But one that I know that some people would like to know about goes the issue of the sewer hookup fee. So that we're proposing, if everybody can get behind it, that Maynard allows sewer into it, there are two things that happen. One is you have to pay a hookup fee. So this project would generate $907,000 worth of fees that would be paid to the town of Maynard. And in theory, the reason that fees is on your books and charged to every project is that represents a fee that contributes towards the town's ongoing infrastructure and investment in their system. And that's sort of the access. If you want to have the benefits of using it, you have to make a contribution towards that. Some may argue, is that enough? Is that, but that's the fee structure that's set forth by your sewer commission for what is the hookup fee. Second thing, just so you know, is that you all pay today a usage fee for access into the sewage based on your water usage. So that there's actually a difference in fee, believe it or not. It's $9.79 for sewer, that fee that's generated on the Maynard side. But if Acton was to hook to it, they would actually, anybody there be paying a higher rate of $13.62. So long term, that there would be additional monies paid for that, just because it would sit on the other side of the town line, whoever came up with that. A couple things you should know else, by the way. We're big into conservation and green and all that other good stuff. So this is proposed to have water and sewer sub-metered. Years ago they used to put 1 meter on a building, and residents would have water included. And I was involved in a project in Tallahassee, and we finally put sub-meters on, so everybody would be charged based on the usage. And it still had 1 water meter at first, but then it broke it down afterwards. The 1 water meter in the first one went down by 50% when people suddenly were responsible to pay and no longer could turn on the water and run to the dumpster or let the hot water run forever. So there's a reason why you do things like that, because it promotes conservation. There are, for those who have heard, a couple houses that have historic nature along the front. Knowing that, we're not crazy enough to sit there and put blinders on. I did have a meeting, or an informal meeting, with the Historic Commission. We met at the site, we walked through the buildings, and they subsequently gave sort of an informal response to me and said they would like to find a way to preserve them. So what we have proposed is that they be relocated on the property. For what purpose? We don't know. We've talked to them and explored. You have a purpose for it. But there is some significance in their minds to these 2 older buildings. One of them is in terrible shape, one's in pretty good shape. But at the moment we are not proposing to demolish, but to just simply relocate them to another portion. Whether or not they're then gifted to the Historic Commission, whether or not we turn them into an extra affordable unit, whether or not, honestly, no decision has been made other than the fact that we recognize that they are part of it within considered historic, and we would respect so and are not proposing to tear them down.
Question,
Yes.
would they be moved in their entirety or only the historic portion?
At the moment, to be quite honest, I hadn't thought about a thing beyond the fact that we preserve it. So the rest of it doesn't have any significance, and some of it would probably fall down. So at the moment, the idea would be move it. Depending on the use, would dictate some of that. But honestly, there's so many myriad of things there, I haven't even got my head past some of them. Some talk about, well, what does this all mean relative to the river? Okay? So the first thing you should know is right now that the existing structures, the concrete, the block, and everything else go up to the river's edge. And for those who have conservation consciousness, that they would argue that that's not particularly a good thing. Okay, that the site currently is designed years ago, does not have sophisticated drainage system for water infiltration, all that good stuff. And so, what we're proposing here first off is to reclaim back 100 feet off the river. With that in mind, we are also talking about the concept of providing this an easement that allows public access along the river. Now, you know, a lot of towns, both in their rail beds and anytime they run across river frontage, want to somehow claw back and say, wait a minute, we want to protect that, which I think is a great idea. And there have been very successful rail trails that have been constructed all over New Hampshire and Massachusetts to take advantage of that. And so while this may not connect anywhere today from a river standpoint, that we're proposing to put a path along there and to provide that access, and hopefully that'll promote future, that there can be other connectivity to get back to using some of the benefits for that. How do conservation commissions feel that way about this whole thing? Well, most of it's enacting. The only thing I've had so far is a conversation with the conservation agent in Maynard. And because of the way the town line runs through, it really doesn't have any impact whatsoever. And she basically said that really there was no jurisdiction over that issue because the frontage here and the issues of its relationship to the setback and everything else, you know, are really fall within more Acton's purview. Now, we ultimately have to go in front of the Maynard Conservation because we need, in the permitting, if it gets so far, we need what's called an order of conditions, which basically is the town is empowered with enforcing the state regulations as it deals with drainage and all the other good stuff. And being that we're talking about putting below parking, modern water infiltration, retention, all that good stuff, is that it's really one system with a town line right in the middle of it. So it's obviously under the purview of both towns. And that if that time ever occurs, we would be in front of the respective board. So let me just give you a couple closing moments, and you know, you can fire away. I'm a nice guy. Hopefully that's one of the things I'm trying to get you guys. Because some of you are going to simply say, I don't want the project. I get that part for whatever reason you have. Totally respect it and understand it. But it's not because I want you to think the developer is evil that's coming in to do something bad, or you know, it's not a casual run kind of event that's taking place. It's a well thought out, conscientious, very high stake investment in both communities in providing this form of housing. Whether or not you like it, whether or not you think it's too tall, whether or not anything else, that's a separate personal preference of how you feel about it. But I do want you to understand that. There are a couple other things that I just want to comment, is that we do recognize that we promote mass transit. We know that there's a green solution around connectivity to the train stations. We, by all means, if and when the time ever happened, would want to reach out and be participants in that. You know, we would love to reduce down, anytime you can reduce down our carbon imprint, we're happy to do so as well, too. A reminder that this does create 74 more units in the town, of which 25% of those are deemed affordable under the 40B. Now, you know, there's many views about 40B, and I know that you all read plenty of things about it. It's not a horrible law, and it's unfortunate that, you know, towns decades and decades ago didn't take the idea of the fact they had to create this form of housing all over the state. And so there was the towns who pushed everybody out through zoning, and then the towns, and so, you know, 40B was unfortunately a way in which everything tried to equate and said that should be shared amongst the state. We're here to try to do it. It does create 19 more units of housing that are deemed affordable. Less of an issue to you, but I think you can understand it. I made the comment about the river frontage, the fact that we would be reclaiming and taking back 100 feet of it, which is a good thing. Your town is what's called the Massachusetts Stretch Code, follows Stretch Code. That does require that we have a higher standard of building design with a goal to achieve a greater than 15% increase in energy efficiency. As I indicated before, a project will generate $217,000+ and taxes go up more of new revenue. It's proposed to fix piping. I mean, we haven't cut a deal to do anything, but we recognize that we need to have sewage. And if your sewage system requires some upgrades, then somebody's got to upgrade the sewer. And in addition to that, there would be a $900,000+ fee that we'd have to pay into the sewer fund in addition to that. There are $183,000 in revenue generated to the town in fees. And lastly, that, you know, an intangible one goes to the issue of, well, what do 254 new households do for us in general? And so here's what I would tell you as well too, is that 254 households have to shop, go to the doctor, need services, and they live. And so they also do generate and help local businesses and communities. Maybe you don't want that. Some of the businesses downtown, they say, we're happy on Saturday if there are more people who would come downtown and populate that and generate it. And while it's really hard for typically residents to put their arms around that, there is an intangible benefit for small businesses who are around to understand that it does add to the community. It's not just people that are coming in who are trying to put burden onto it. It actually does prove to be beneficial in the long run. Now that's my spiel, and I have no doubt that there's comments. I understand that the mic is open to this close, not because, you know, maybe I could swing it around so whoever comes up and wants to say something could actually either that or grab my mic, because I think they're trying to record this. Please, you're welcome to ask questions. Just don't hurt me, and because I have to go home to my family yet, and you know, and happy to take your comments and concerns, because as you heard, the working group was not intended to decide anything on your behalf. That is a process yet to be, that we've gone down. It was to have a discussion, to talk about the things that I've shared with you tonight. These are the facts of where we have been in our discussion. Nothing else has taken place. And so again, would you like to come up and please let everybody know your name and where you might live? You want to use this and face the other way so people can...
Hi, I'm Loretta West. I have a couple of questions, well, maybe one. This is on Powdermill Road going into Maynard. What's the setback and what type of screening will we get so we don't see five stories of apartment from the Powdermill?
You have another question too? You can ask at the same time. No.
Kind of a basic one. I'm with the Garden Club and I've been taking care of the town of Maynard side there. Is that going to stay there?
Okay, so let me, if I could. So the answer is, I don't know to the second one, because again, I haven't gotten that far. 40B permits us in part to also ask for waivers from the height regulation. Yes, these are tall buildings and they are proposed to be up front. Why do you do that? Why do you have to come up with such strong buildings? So I'll try to answer the question is because, you know, this is very expensive to do. Nothing comes cheap, 400,000 there, 900,000 there, and at some point that somebody has to understand that it's real money, and it's not that the developer's coming in to make a windfall. Matter of fact, 40B has another very peculiar aspect to it. It limits profit to the developer. I'm going to get to the answer of density and height. So it limits profitability to the developer. And in a rental project, it says that the developer can have no more than 10% of income generated from the property from its equity in any given year. It limits the amount. And it's intended to try to make sure that people didn't gouge, because you probably saw a lot of the 40B for sale stuff. And the for sale was, best ones were, and I have to say, because I had clients who proposed it, is, you know, we're going to offer over 55 housing, restrictive housing, and I'm not saying this is all bad, by the way, because it does create community and service. Well, we're not going to impact schools because we're all over 55. And they would come in and do it in such a way that they were looking to yield a huge amount of windfall on their bottom line. And they're capped as well, too. They can't earn more than 20% for taking the risk. But in rental, in perpetuity, it's no more than 10% of the developer's equity at any given time, and every once in a while they get to have an appraisal done and reset that. And if there was anything that occurred over that, they would then contribute that money to the town's housing fund. So why the density and the height, therefore? I didn't skirt the question. I was trying to get myself back to that. What is that? Because ultimately to attract debt and equity to a project, whether or not it's my client's equity or whether or not he has friends and family, however that comes about, you obviously have to get some return on your capital. You wouldn't take the risk otherwise. And based on the characteristics of your site and its cost to acquire, how much it was in land and everything else, that this is the balance and why the heights. Yes, we will be asking for a waiver from your height regulations for that. We also, just so you know, in our design, part of the height is called a parapet. So that you know, for your own houses, for every air conditioning unit you have for central air, you have a compressor. So we don't want to put the compressors on the ground because that's not good for the garden club because it makes for ugliness. And so they're proposed to go on a roof behind what will become a 6-foot really wall where the roof is actually lower and all that stuff gets hidden. And so that still doesn't make them small buildings. I'm not going to argue that point. But that adds to height. The last thing that adds to height a little bit too to the size of the building is the fact that there's a technique in construction today where you really want 9-foot ceilings in your living area. So we all own our houses from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and they were the typical 7-foot something ceilings, they're low, and in apartments where you're in 900, 1,000, 1,100 square feet, it feels small. And so believe it or not, if you go up and make it 9-foot ceilings, it feels a lot differently, the experience for the renter. And it's not just because it gets you to rent, it's just because I'm telling you it makes a huge difference in its functionality and its life. And so you don't want to build something that was the 1970 vintage of how they would build it. You want to build something as it's built to current standard, and that's probably what they did. So these are proposed to have tall ceilings everywhere, and then add the parapet. They do add to the height overall of the building. And so it's sort of a balance between it, and Acton is aware of it. Now, does that mean we're hiding these buildings? No, the answer is we're not. It's very hard to hide a 5-story building. And then, you know, they will be visible and seen. I'm not going to kid you. And is this the final look? Not necessarily. It's where we are at this point in our elevations. We do this, we stop. There's so much process and so much time that will take place and so many discussions that who knows, the ZBA could say that, hey, they want you to do X, or we could, you know, it's just a long way to go. We do this stepped up design because it creates character, and we try to come back and forth in design so that they're not just rectangles unto themselves. And so there is thought to the process, and again, they're all elevated access buildings. Yes?
That didn't answer my question though. I asked what is the setback and what type of screening is going to be.
Well, we actually haven't done any landscaping design whatsoever, so I'm not skirting the question, but honestly, at this point of the project, I have a site plan that shows green areas and setback. I believe that's, I can't even remember the dimensions, so don't hold me to it. I think that's,
15 feet.
what's that?
15 feet is what you're told.
Is that what it is? I don't even remember. And then again, this is a conceptual plan that all we've done to this point is it's been given to a set of engineers and said, is this feasible? Can you make the geometry work? But honestly, it's still at a very conceptual stage of its development and intended to show size and relative location.
Hi. So my name's Nancy. I've been a Deerhead Run resident for about 10 years. I'm terribly concerned about the traffic implications. If there are 254 units, 1.75 parking spaces per unit, that's 444 additional potential cars on the road. And, you know, there aren't a lot of routes out of Maynard. It's going to Route 2, it's going to 117, it's going to 27, 495. I think the impact on Route 62 is going to be huge. And the traffic study that you've done doesn't even take into account the new development on Parker Street that's being built. So I'm just curious how that's going to be mitigated, if that amount of parking is actually necessary for a complex this size.
Okay?
Yep.
First off, as I said before, national statistics say you need to provide 1.75. Not everybody has 2 cars, and there are 1-bedroom units here in part of the configuration, but that when you consider guests and people that come in and out, the answer is that's what they've said is designed. Now, all those people don't go in and out at the same time, and so I agree that it does impact traffic. And that's why, again, we had the traffic gurus. I may be a relatively smart guy in what I do, but I'm not smart enough to tell you the mathematics to it. They follow all sorts of standards that deal on a much wider basis, and that's why the town hired its own independent traffic review to review it and to argue the assumptions and the conclusions reached in between. The Parker Street, the other project is way down. there's no guru. You may think it intricately involves this project, but, and it may or may not, and it's yet to be developed. The answer is that the traffic gurus don't take into account that. They do that in what they call the build, no build scenario, where they're projecting an increase in 62. And then they take into account the things that are known in the close proximity, because that's their guideline. So I can't, you have to read the study, you have to read what VHB responded, who was the town's expert, to the question at hand. But I'm not an engineer to be able to tell you that, you know, but they tell me, the report says, and VHB agrees, that there's no failure to the turning movements along the way. At the time, and they did things like, I'll give you one example. So I think there's a speed limit on that road of 40, is that my memory correct? 35, okay. However, you should all know, because you all break the, half you probably break the law, is that you don't go the speed limit, you all go quick. And so one of the discussions was, you'll be surprised.
Traffic we had already.
You'll be surprised at times, because they actually went and they took statistics for it. They actually measured the speed and watched the behavior of traffic. Now, I agree, there are times of the day there's no way you could do that, but there are other times of the day you'd be surprised how quick traffic goes. So, the assumption to, first off, one of the things they looked at was accidents. They looked at accidents in the general area, what happened, what kind of accidents, did somebody get hurt, and there's no significant anything that's going on. There's some fender benders, of course, that occurred, but they look at one of the things about time it takes to stop a car. And the time it takes to stop a car is directly related to the speed in which you travel. And so the initial assumption by our engineer was, well, the speed limit says it's 35. VHB came back and said, no, that's not what, however, you said the average speed that most people are traveling is greater than that. They made them rerun the numbers at the higher speed. So there has been a lot of beating up of all those kinds of issues, because they all do interrelate in some fashion. But, you know, there is no question of high volume of cars. There is no question. In the morning, they flow a lot of times to the train station, and at night they come back again. And, you know, all that was taken into account in the analysis. But not everybody comes in and out at the same time of the day, which is why 400 and some odd cars does not result in a catastrophic degradation of an intersection.
Cornelia Keenan, at the beginning of your talk, you indicated that this was kind of a messy sort of site and possibly had been industrial. Is it a clean site?
Well, unfortunately, you can thank who did digital a long time ago to the fact that it's not 100% clean. There is a plume in that whole area of stuff that comes down. We have done extensive reports. There are some things, asbestos, that need to be removed, some barrels that need to be removed. But for the stuff that was worked on the site, for the stuff that happened on that site, there's been no added environmental issues that will not be resolved through process. But there's nothing in there that prohibits it from that so-called plume that exists from ages ago that affects somebody's ability to have a residence, or there's no environmental consequences from that.
I have actually two comments. My big concern for this is the sewer system in Maine, and it's failing. It's 100 years old, and we know we've repaced very expensive recently on River Street and on Waltham Street. My little street on Park Street, we've had 7 houses for the last 5 years that have very extensive backup sewers into their homes repeatedly. So we know that there's a problem. Having said that, I heard what you said about replacing the line as it went up Powdermill, but said that the lift station is adequate. But what about the pipe that runs under the river over to, has that been scoped? Because my guess is it's of the same age approximately as what runs under Powdermill. That's my first question, and I'll leave you to answer that. My second is more a comment. I think there's a big difference. I wasn't going to say this when I got here because I didn't think it was an issue, but public safety, $217,000 in taxes, but there's a difference between mutual aid and first responders, and that concerns me. Mutual aid is something that's been around for a long time. We help our neighbors, we man the station, they fight the fire in their town. But it sounds to me like because we're closer to the Mews, we are there, and we're closer to this development, we'll be going there before Acton Fire and Police. These are just things that I think we need to be upfront about and not just pass them by and say, the chief says that everything is fine, because those things worry me.
And I appreciate that. Listen, if the project was developed, we don't want anybody here to get hurt and not have somebody be able to respond in the event of emergency. And that's why we have conversation with the chief, why they went and looked at the statistics, and and why eventually, it's my belief that even Acton and if this was to move forward, Acton and Maynard chiefs need to sit down together in a room too and make sure that they have an agreement, understanding about how they do it. But public safety is a concern, and that's why I sat down with them. I can't, beyond that, you'd have to ask and have a conversation with your both chiefs to ask them, why they feel the way they do and why they believe that they feel that they can adequately service it, subject to whatever, issues about the ambulance that need to be addressed. As to the sewer, there are two companies that service you today, Wayne's Drains and Stantec, who are your gurus and experts to it. And so I can only tell you, we scoped down to the lift station. They tell us there's not an issue about crossing the river, and there's not an issue about the plant. And so I can only tell you what they tell me, that was not an issue, and that what we did was we analyzed to where they got to a part of the system that they in fact felt was at that point sufficient and operational and non-issue. Why, therefore, is one contributing, even if they were to hook up? In this particular example, 900 some odd thousand, because you're absolutely right. It takes a lot of money to operate a town sewer infrastructure, and besides the fact of whether or not there's work that needs to be done on Powdermill today to improve flows on that, there is the ongoing issues of both why you pay it in your rate, and also why any new construction makes a contribution as well too. And so, but that gives you the background. I can't, but the answer is there was no issues identified in our discussion.
My question is about safety for pedestrians and bicyclists, because as you know, there's no bike lanes on Powdermill, there's no safe crosswalks across Powdermill Road, and more importantly to me, there's no sidewalk that goes from here down to the Stop and Shop plaza. So what I see now is, and it really scares me, is people walking in the road carrying groceries on a dark winter evening. And that's not a good thing. And I also realize, in the 20 years I've been here, 2 pedestrians have been killed crossing this road in front of this site. And granted, that's 2 in 20 years, but nobody lived there, and now 500 people are going to live here. So I guess the question is, who's going to be putting in the safe crosswalks? Who's going to be putting in the safe sidewalks? Who's going to be putting in the bike lanes? And who's going to be paying for them? Is it the developer, or is Acton doing that?
Thank you for the question. So, I started off this presentation talking about a lip or just going straight to the ZBA. The thing that can happen in the ZBA is, under 40B laws, is that towns lose a little bit of their quote-unquote negotiation skills to address sometimes things like that. The reason we went into a lip, and where we have not gotten to yet, and it would only be done ultimately in the Board of Selectmen, is a question over whether or not there are other mitigation that this site might do, the developers might do. We have not advanced that point. At this point, we only discussed the things that I've reported to you tonight. And there was an example by the DPW one day that said that there needed to be connectivity of sidewalks. And all I can tell you to that effect, the developer's not opposed to that. But we've not gotten to anywhere close to that issue yet. And those are where the evolution of why we would prefer to go through the LIP method, to have that dialogue and to be able to talk to the selectmen and potentially come to some agreement on what those mitigation methods are. You can't ever ask a developer, well, you'd like to ask a developer, certainly I would too, to solve all problems. But the answer is, are there things that this project could potentially do? And the answer is, I'm going to say yes, absolutely. But we just haven't advanced them at this point in our discussion.
Hi there, my name is Arman. I'm at the Deer Hedge Run. So I actually got 2 questions, and the first question could be a silly one. I just want to know the reason for the proposal on the 2 towns as opposed to just having it all in Acton, first and foremost. Because it sounds like they need our sewage, and that's the reason why this is being proposed. The second question is the height of these buildings, and from the powder mill, from the road, what's the site and how is this going to be seen from the road?
Thank you. And by the way, there are ever no such thing as bad and silly questions. That's what I used to tell you. I used to teach a couple classes in adult education. You always got to start off with that. No silly questions. The answer is the height, they are going to be seen. We have not gotten into fine design to talk about what that profile might look like. But more so to the issue of why, because we in two towns. Well, first off, my wife would tell me because I'm a glutton for punishment to subject myself to doing this twice. But the other one is that's how this, my client acquired this property, and it just so happened that it fell that way. Maynard does not have met its capacity under the definition of affordability, 10% affordability, according, if you follow that methodology of determining affordability. And so the answer is that this was our design and why we thought it created benefits to both towns in being able to provide this form of housing and also to provide additional affordability at the same time.
I'm Kevin Butler, I also live on Deer Path. I'd just like to press on that a little bit more. This four-story facade along Powdermill Road is out of character with anything, certainly in Maynard or in any of the surrounding towns that I can recall. I don't think there's any structure of that substance nearby. It seems, first of all, an odd proposal to this community of both Acton and Maynard. And secondly, that an architect could do a much better job at least reducing the facade at street side. Could you respond to that?
Well, again, one of the things that will certainly come up in discussion through the board process will be height and density. I mean, it's one of the things that will get discussed. And this is a concept that's currently proposed. In terms of the question about a character, so I'm going to answer it in sort of a different way, which is to talk about the evolution of 40B in a sense. So 40B allowed developers to come into land that was not necessarily zoned for multifamily and propose a multifamily project. Okay, whether that be condos or apartments and what have you. So you will notice if you go through the Commonwealth and look where lots of them are sometimes located, they're located adjacent to town lines, in part to respond to sort of what you said in part. So often towns that do not have multifamily, high-rise or mid-rise multifamily projects, and one that's trying to also provide enclosed parking and have to go up, they don't have it. It's not a product that exists. And so many times that developers look for projects that straddle town lines where zoning is not necessarily in a single-family residential, and it's not here. It's an industrial area where the impact, it's an industrial area.
On the active
side. And where it's sort of reduced. Now, for those who live around there, they say, well, wait a minute, what about me? Well, this is the welcome to the controversy of it all, and why many of you are here on a Thursday night, and I know most of you, if not all of you, against the project. We didn't bring the people that supported it tonight. And it's because you have a concern about whether it's a character.
What kind of comment is that?
Well, because it's hard to answer it other than to say it's because we're proposing it. So that, it's a very hard question to answer because it often ends up being exactly what it is, which is you find a place where you try to mitigate out and try to offer some product that reduce it. It's a hard one to answer because the answer is the public sentiment is, I don't want to see it. And I get that fact. And I understand it. I've been doing this for a lot of years. It's just not always easy to stand up here and take the hits. So, and you all know feel that way, and maybe the town and maybe the boards will ultimately feel that way. And that's where the progress. Now, whether or not there can be some balance reached, those are discussions that take place as it gets advanced. Whether or not there's mitigation that can be provided, whether or not there's changes in density and massing, whether or not all that stuff. And that's what process is about. And we're not there at this point. At this point, all we did was to explore the facts in which I laid out to you tonight, and that's all we've done. We've not made any formal application where those discussions will take place, and your either elected community or your board, your ZBA, will then go ahead and vet those, of which then again, your comments will come in as part of the public testimony. Different than tonight where you just hear making comment, but they'll become part of the record where, and the bodies will decide. And so it's a very lengthy process. We're not expecting to come in here and be out of here in a week. This is a long process.
My name is Eve Schluter, and I just want to understand better the comments you made about water and sewer. You're saying you're getting your water from Acton, but then you're saying that there's no capacity for sewer, and there's a lot of discussion out there and potentially some rumor about what that actually means in terms of Acton not actually having capacity. So if you could expand upon that and explain that a little bit better, please.
So as best I understand it, Acton has resisted and claimed that their infrastructure relative to their sewage treatment plant is at or near capacity with allocation for certain growth or things that are happening already on the books. And so they've resisted and the issue of whether or not they have capacity for us to tax their sewage. Their sewage treatment plant's across the river. It's not like it's very far away. And they say that they have a capacity issue at the plant. On the other side of the coin, their water precinct, their independent water, they have water capacity. And so, that's what sort of started. We started this thing, God, it's got to be 8 months or a year ago, with a joint meeting of all the departments in Acton and Maynard and some board members in Acton, and there was a discussion about if a project like this was proposed and if it was to be supported by the boards, and there was lots of ifs in it, how it could be serviced by these utilities. From that sort of became the, Acton had the water but not the sewer. Maynard at the plant, you can argue all day long but talk to the experts, your plant has capacity, subject to being able to properly get to the plant, but did not have water. And that's just how this whole thing sprang, and that's how the discussions took place. Acton Water was approached. Their board has indicated that they would provide water. And Maynard, all we've done is analyze the things I've told you tonight. That's all that's taken place. Come on up, hit the hot seat.
I have a technical question about 40B. I think you earlier said you were pretty experienced in that. Does the 40B process require Maynard to give sewer service to an out-of-town apartment building? And if so, where has that been required before?
I might be an expert, but I don't know the answer to that one, to be quite honest. I don't know if there's any requirement whatsoever. I don't know. Yeah, I would expect there probably is not, but I'm not an expert in that enough to comment.
Hi, Lee Karras. I have two questions. One is there a floodplain issue at all here? And two, are comparable units on both the Acton and Maynard side going to have the same rent?
Yes, to the last question, without question. There's no separation here between I'm living in Acton or Maynard. And the answer is the rents would be the same. There is an affordability complex component to each one of them, but there's no way we're going to differentiate. That would say that, oh, I'm going to say one's better than the other. As far as we're concerned, if a project like this was developed, we're supportive of it completely. Well, I'm sorry, what was the other question?
Floodplain.
Oh, floodplain. There is a floodplain, but it doesn't come back, if my memory serves me correctly, that most of the property is not subject to it. It does come back into property for some distance, but it's not a problem relative to what the engineers tell me in its development. That river has been known, obviously, to spill over its banks.
Yes, it has.
Yes, it has. We're aware of that. We're aware of that.
I'm Ron Calabria. I went into
maybe characterize this piece of property a little differently. The Maynard property is this dotted line that I couldn't see from sitting there, but it goes right here. So when we talked about an industrial burnt out piece of property, this property in Maynard is zoned single-family residential. It's not industrial. The two historical homes are here. There's another individual home here and another one here. That's it. The industrial buildings and whatever the zoning is enacted. So this is zoned residential. It is residential now, single family. So in terms of, and the other thing is the developer didn't buy this parcel. There's 4 parcels here and a bunch of parcels there, so it was acquired in pieces. So the idea that this is one industrial parcel could be characterized differently. So when we do this, there are choices. So if, I think if a developer or anybody buys a piece of land, they should be able to do whatever the zoning allows. So in developing this, because I frankly don't care about this, since I live here, well, they get all the tax money in Acton, and that's fine, they can do what they want. So this could be developed as, by right, as single-family homes with no meetings like this. Just go to the planning board and they could build 9 houses. Or another choice is they could propose to change this zoning to multifamily. If they wanted to change it to multifamily, they could build like 19, maybe 20 units. The process would be they go to the planning board, make an application, there have to be hearings, and then it has to go to a town meeting vote, 2/3 vote by you folks. Another option is they could propose an overlay district. So at Parker Street, that's zoned industrial and it has an overlay, which means it has a specific zoning on top of the industrial that doesn't do away with the industrial, but it allows other things. And that's a specific zoning district, the only one like that in Maynard. You could also do that here. You could also say, I don't really want, I'd like to build more places, make more money, or whatever that answer is. And so I'd like to make this an overlay district, and then I could do more than 19 or 20 or something else. And if they did that, they would go to the planning board, there'd be hearings, and there's a difference between a public meeting and a public hearing. So a public hearing means you will get the influence of a public meeting as you get to talk, but there's not really a hearing type of exchange. And then there'd be a town meeting vote, 2/3 vote would be taking place. So somebody, I think Arnold, you asked about why we try to do this. So but if you do 40B, you don't do any of that. You go to the Board of Selectmen, and the Board of Selectmen has said they would have hearings. They're not required legally to have hearings, but they would have them. Then it goes to the state after documents are signed. Then it goes to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a special permit. And once it gets to the Zoning Board of Appeals, changes could be made, but it's not that easy once the state said. So my question is, which I would get to finally, why did you choose the 40B, whether it's friendly or not, versus the other choices?
Because we like it and we think the project makes sense and we're believers in it. I mean, I don't, Ron, you and I've met Ron before, and I know how he feels about it, and we view it differently, and we think it's important, we think it's a good site for the town, and we think it's a good project for the town. So, that's our view towards it, and we think it's,
For which town?
For both.
Well, like I said, yeah, we don't really know what to think because we have one conversation. The other thing I want to point out is you may have changed all this, but when you spoke to the selectmen on April 18th, and when you and I spoke in May, these two, when we talked about this, you're saying you don't know the heights, and maybe that's flexible. But these two, you said to the selectmen, was 72 feet.
Yeah, I'm aware.
But you were asked what's the height of the buildings, you didn't answer it. You said we're negotiating and can be flexible. So I'm saying, you told us and me, 72, I think 48, I think 45. So the zoning is 40, the mill is 70. So maybe it's something different, but I think, you're saying people are asking questions and they're attacking or they're not for this. That's not true. I don't care if there's a development here. That's fine. But this isn't really burned out industrial. And it can be put together and one person bought it, but it doesn't have to be and there are other choices. And you could get density with an overlay. Thank you.
Anybody else?
If you like to.
Andy Moreland, just a quick one. The 1.75, is that required, or could you reduce that a little bit?
Well, there's two parts to it. Actually, the zoning in most times in multifamily usually requires 2 per unit. Actually, it's more. And so 1.75 has been, the national studies have said that that's the right proportion that ends up providing, you know, you don't want people to come home and can't find a parking place. So it creates the balance to it. So that's all just based on lots of modeling, lots of units, and lots of positions to it. I would be, could that be 1.65? Sure, it could be slightly, but the answer is I wouldn't want to jeopardize the functionality, make it so people couldn't have a guest come over, and all the other kinds of things that one would expect. So that's why we start off with that is what we recommend to be the number.
Barbara O'Brien from Silver Hill Road. And I have a question about the developer. Has he developed other properties within our area?
So they can hear, I know.
Okay.
We got to do that. He has not developed properties similar to this. And in part, that's why I was dragged into it, because I have done a great deal of this. And so he brought in recognizing that if he wanted to advance it, he needed to bring a team in of experts far greater. And that's the point. It would be third-party professionally managed. It would be, you know, he's not the contractor, and that's what keeps me going.
So his intention would be to develop the property and then sell it, or turn it over to professional management?
Well,
or like an Avalon or a Mill Creek?
Well, it would be my recommendation to him, and I don't care what developer, and I deal with a lot of private, high net worth investors who develop this kind of stuff, is that they should always have it professionally managed. It's an art to management. It's a true, whether it's Lincoln or Avalon or whoever the management entity is, about how they source and find tenants, how they, the whole process of knowing fair market laws and all the things that are associated with it. So the intent at this point that he, whether or not is long-term, where he end up, he's proposing to be the developer and hold this for his investment portfolio. But he would not be by any means the manager. He doesn't have that kind of operation to do that correctly.
Okay. And would there be any interest by the developer of making it look more as a village instead of Quarter Square?
Yeah.
You're asking the same question I think others have asked in their own way is, you know, you would like to see the massing be reduced, and that's a discussion that will take place.
Not even the mass, but just the blockage of it, making it look more New England.
The aesthetics.
The aesthetics.
Well, the answer to that question is, yes, it's open. You know, Tim, when I tasked him, the architect, is to say, come up with a concept. This is what he drew up. We said, that's a nice looking, my view was, it was a nice looking building, but it's beyond this one pretty picture, we haven't done anything else to them. So the answer is to what one puts on the side of how it gets put together is still something that can evolve over time.
And then my final question, I'll sit down. South Acton train station, West Concord train station, and Lincoln train stations are really the access for the train to North Station. And if you don't hit the parking lots at the right time, you drive to Alewife. Is there some plan to form a van pool or pick up and drop off at this new community?
Hold the mic for 1 second, I can answer that question better in a second. So, the answer to that is that over time, I'm aware that there is currently, and let me just make sure I understand it correctly, the Crosstown Connect, I think, exists, which is comprising of 6 public partners, Acton, Boxborough, Concord, Littleton, Maynard, and Westford, and 8 private partners, including the Terrace and others, who creates some sort of shuttle service. And the answer is, we promote and will participate in that in any way we can, is that we are conscious green. I know you may not think so, but would like to reduce our carbon footprint as well. And so the answer is that we understand two things. One is that there is a shortage of parking at the train station. Second is we also just believe that if we can create ways in which people can commute and do things like that and be more efficient, it would be better.
Jack McKean, the premise that you put forth so far is that there is surface parking and the buildings above it. Has any consideration been given to underground parking as a way of lowering the building height?
Yeah, there was a discussion on it. There are two factors there. It's very difficult to do in a building of this width to be able to go down and drop and create that space. It's literally almost not feasible in a sense to do that. Other than the fact that we did take a discussion up front, I'm not sure that based on the water table, though the water table is not right up on it, and the soil conditions, whether or not it will also prohibit that in that sense as well too. So there's a couple issues. There's an economic issue, and I think there's a logistical issue with the way it functions on this site. But I appreciate the comment, and certainly will continue to ask the architect and engineers the question.
Hi, Sarah Donnelly. I have two subjects I wanted to address. The first was sewer, and the first thing that screamed out at me when you were speaking was just in Maynard, based on the 74 units you gave us, the fact that every bedroom has a bathroom. That seems kind of crazy given our sewer issues, because if you were to say to anyone in this town that knows anything about the sewer issues that you're going to throw in what I accounted for just in Maynard, 121 bathrooms, and we're not just going to be responsible for Maynard's bathrooms, but Acton's as well. So you can imagine you can maybe triple that, we'd run you out of town. And I have to say that the sewer fees you mentioned, the nearly $1 million in sewer fees, that's awesome. But what is that? I guess what I'm getting at is the long-term implications on the pumping station, on the sewer plant, and all of that. How far does that $1 million go over time? And range drains and sand tech, has there been any look as to how long that infrastructure can last with all this additional outflow and sewer needs and all that? And the other thing regarding the sewers that I'm interested in is you gave an estimate of about $400K to fix existing conditions with the roots and the breakages and the fails and all that. And is the developer willing to pay that entire price, whether it's $400K or $800K, and who's responsible for paying that?
Well, again, we're not to a point where we've negotiated anything with the town. But in concept, we recognize that if we were to access the system, that the system has to function correctly. And so we view that as a burden to the developer to have to make the system operational. Meaning the answer to your question is yes, in theory, the pipe would be fixed regardless of whether it's $400,000 or $500,000, that in order to get the proper flow, you need to make the repair to the system. The question over why do we add the second bathroom? Because today modern apartments require that. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're doubling the flow. It's that, it used to be apartments were designed, if you remember the older 70 vintage, you go from the living area and you walk down a hallway, there'd be one bedroom next to the other, and there'd be a shared bathroom. Well, the problem with that, what it doesn't get done today, now the idea is the living area is in the middle and bedrooms are on opposite side of it, so that there's some separation between the bedrooms and from the parent and the child, or for two people sharing an apartment. It could be elderly, it could be a couple doing, whatever the case particularly. So the answer is, we think that modern design really mandates the fact that you have that. They would be low flow toilets, again, with sub-metering, with the idea that you make sure people are responsible. We think it's an important component to it. And then relative to your question, I try to remember all these, the lift station, We just asked the question, it's about what it would take and how that, as to the system would function. We did Standex or nobody offered comment to say that, you know, it's got 3 years left to some lift station. There was no discussion, nobody brought it up as being an issue that the pump was not functional, couldn't handle capacity, or there was some ultimate quick failure that this would burden it by, that some other part wouldn't. So the answer is, it just wasn't a discussion at this point in time.
Okay, so then, whether the developer goes back to Mainstreams or Sandtech, or we go into negotiations with the town to find out, I would be very interested to know what the number of years on the pumping station, and whatever infrastructure is implicated by this, how long that lasts for, and how, what's the cost implication on the town in however many years in terms of how long it lasts for. And I also would want to know who's paying for the infrastructure fix before the development goes in. And then I had a whole other subject I wanted to talk about.
Fair enough. So the answer to your question is, if you want to ask those questions, understand that when at such time, if and when this gets to the selectmen, you should come and ask the question of your selectmen and let them answer it. I don't really necessarily. It's a whole different issue about the management of your infrastructure in your town. We only can evaluate through what we know and what we've been told and what happens. So.
Okay. And this probably also goes to the selectmen. I know some of them are here, so I guess I'm speaking to you right now as well. You gave a very, in my opinion, conservative projection of potential 11 students based on the 74 units going in on the Maynard side for going potentially into a school district with no idea what grades they're going into or any of that. I personally think 11 is very conservative. This is a town that is having an influx of families in terms of the people that are moving here, and for 74 units to only bring in 11 students, I think, I just can't see that. I think that's very low. The other part of that I'll mention is that our town has a 17% rate of servicing kids that need additional services beyond just their general education. So let's go with the 11. That's one child that we'll probably get that's going to need additional services, and our school budget does not have room for bringing in additional services. And that's based on conservative estimates. So just wanted to put that out there.
I appreciate your comment. Well, I can tell you that, just as a sideline, I, on behalf of some other client, asked to manage about 800 units of apartments, and I'm also remarkably surprised how little students are generated out of apartments. It's a lot of times for the young family, the working, couple, that, when they start to have a child, often they end up wanting to migrate, as we all did when we were growing up, to other alternative housing. It just doesn't seem to generate the kind of student population. But that being said, all I can do is rely upon the people who've analyzed tens and thousands of units, and that's what the Rutgers study is about. That's what they've done. And that's the only statistical basis that I can work from. You guys can let me sit down soon, aren't you?
You can sit down. I'll probably be in a couple minutes. So you seem like a delight, so I don't want this to seem like a talk. One thing that I've been thinking about, so I'm a member of the school committee, and I thought I'd come here with lots of school questions, and I think the amount of students we get will be determined by whether people have babies and stay, and I always think it's funny when people can predict that. So I don't believe any of the studies, but that's not your fault. But I'm much more concerned as a taxpayer and someone who's been in Maynard for a long time and plans on staying and raising our son. My first question to you, and that's so I can then have a selectman type question, is what is your plan B if you don't get access to the sewer? A lot of times a developer will come to town, and we've just dealt with a developer for almost 10 years to develop another piece of property in town. And so I guess my first question is, do you have a plan to hook up with Acton?
I was going to ask you, how critical, that's an intriguing question, and just how critical is the answer to that question to the success of this project? And I'm actually kind of surprised that given that this covers 2 towns, and you want each town to provide a set of utilities for both towns, I'm surprised you don't know the answer to that question at this point.
Well, You guys gotta let me have some conversations with my client that we have a conversation. Of course, we talk about what is, but I don't think that this is the forum for me to discuss with my client what his plans are, if not. I'm here to present based on a concept plan and a set of discussions about that. And I appreciate the answer, and if I was seeing the issues, I'd probably ask the question. But that's a discussion that the client and I, if given that point in time, we'll sit down and have a discussion about what would be next steps.
Okay, that's two different things. You can not know what your plan B is or not want to discuss that with us before you discuss it with them. But the question of how critical, the answer to that question is, can you force Maynard, for example, to provide sewage for the Appleton units? The answer to that question of how critical that is to the success of a project like this is just a completely different answer.
Well, I don't believe the question is that we can force Maynard to do it. Maynard will make a decision through its elected officials and its boards as to what it will or will not agree to do. And that's all we ask, is that there be a fair deliberation to that question at hand. So the answer is that they may reject the question, in which case then we will have a discussion and go back to decide whether or not, in fact, what alternative might be. At this point in time, as I've indicated before, Acton says it doesn't have sewer capacity, Maynard says it does. We've proposed and structured a series of conversations, and that's all we've done to this point. There are still many people that must vote and decide ultimately and deliberate whether or not, in fact, they would approve such a request. All of this has been a discussion to ask, what is the status of the sewer system? What would it take to connect to the sewer system? What would it take to repair the sewer system? And what fees would be generated for us to hook up to the sewer system? And that's all we've done so far, nothing else beyond that. And it's one of the things I wanted to make clear tonight, is that, to let the work group off the hook, to understand that all we've done is have a discussion about these things as a way to be able to pull information and to be able to get facts. But it's not a deliberation as to whether or not, in fact, the board will support it, whether or not the commission will allow it, or anything else. That's yet to unfold in the future. And I really mean it. I know it sounds like it's a coy answer, but that's all that's happened. We came here to have a discussion, and that's all we've been having up to this point in time. And we're here tonight just so I was afraid that there was misinformation also in part out about what these discussions have been about, what is these discussions have taken place, who's been involved in them, and what have we been talking about. And so tonight was to be able to share with you all that information, just to make sure, again, I get the sense of those who oppose and their issues for it, and I respect that. But I just wanted to come here today and at least set the record straight, to just be able to state clearly what we've all been talking about, and that's all we've been doing up to this point, just talking.
So if we still had a minute, I just wanted to I can't attend every meeting, so in case I'm not at the selectmen meeting, I just wanted to say, since a lot of my colleagues are in the room, I think one of the lessons we learned very recently from 129 Parker Street was the developer, and I believe our own experts like Stantec said, oh, it's XYZ to fix these sewer pipes. And then, of course, we open up the sewer pipes, and I don't know if it was 3 times the cost or 10 times the cost, because I can only pay so much attention to that project without pulling my own hair out. But it was significantly more. And then we learned as a town that there's something called proportional responsibility, which is no matter what we had signed up for with this developer, and this is not you, the other developer, we were proportionally responsible for the costs of those sewer fixes, because I don't have the vernacular. And that was really, really sad, because we couldn't have had more legal people looking out for us. We had our own in-house people doing the best they can, and everyone means well. But I think there's such a hornet's nest with putting more people on the sewer system. So I guess my only thing to my colleagues respectfully is very much consider adding another 250 units and what we're going to get for potential revenue, because I don't see the math even close. And it's possible I'm not aware of some other math, but I also know that the previous Board of Selectmen, so not a lot of my colleagues right now, waived $500,000 in sewer hookup fees last year. Again, with tight budgets and things like that, I don't know all the details, but knowing that 5 people, and it could be 5 different people because we change boards over all the time, can waive those fees, just try not to be too enamored with $900,000, because even sitting on the board now, you can't guarantee that that wouldn't be waived by someone else someday. So I guess my thing is, to me, it's all economics. We have to look out for the town. It really has very little to do with you being delightful. Your presentation was delightful. But this is a town that's done a lot of thought about development and what it means for us, but I think we've all learned it really just comes down to the money. I think Bill's point about the pedestrians wasn't something I thought about. I thought that was great. You know, I'm not as concerned about historical old houses and stuff like that, but just really think about the economics, so.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We all said, I know it's late for many. I thank you for coming. And,
Can I just add one more thing about the traffic?
Yes. Come on, stay seated. We'll come over to you.
I'm not sure that the study actually talked about the increased traffic due to the marijuana dispensary, the new Acton Senior and Health Center near Concord Muse, the new Powdermill Vet Hospital, plus all the additional, I don't even know what to call it, congestion out by 62 and Route 2. My place of work was 10.2 miles from here. It took me over 30 minutes to get there because of the traffic in the morning. And earlier this week at 5 o'clock, and I live at Deer Hedge, it took me almost 10 minutes to make a left-hand turn out of Deer Path. The second thing is I'm concerned about overtime for our first responders and how that's going to affect our taxes.
I'm not sure in either one how I'm supposed to respond, but I mean, I appreciate the comment in that, you know, the gurus, they do their build, no build, and their engineering on that, so, you know, you have to analyze and study. I can't recount everything they take into account, but they talk about growth, they project against growth, even if we're not there, so, that would be, I can't answer that one, and the responders, that's up to the chiefs and Bart to be able to comment on that one. I thank you all for coming, and appreciate it.